You allow him to turn the corner. Mama, there goes that man.
Puts up the shot. It's good. Kyrie Irving.
Oh, if you don't like that, you don't like NBA basketball. Oh, boy.
Welcome, everyone, to the First Pick Podcast, your source for NBA news-related content. Thanks for listening. Welcome, everyone, back to another episode of the First Pick Podcast. You guys really love the team in-depth, analysis. I've been doing 3 so far, and today we got the Charlotte Hornets. Now, the Charlotte Hornets are a pretty interesting team, but first and foremost, before we get into, the team in-depth analysis, I want to send out prayers and everything to Bronny James. As I posted on my First Pick Podcast Instagram, he did suffer a cardiac arrest at USC. I don't know if it was practice or shoot around or something, but he suffered that. Thankfully, he was rushed to an ICU and he's off the ICU now, so he should be recovering. But yeah, super scary situation. I hope none of this, holds him back. I hope he comes back a million times stronger. I didn't really want to talk about it in the past pod, or I really don't want to get too much into depth on it this pod. It's supposed to be, lighthearted, fun, get you guys to know more about the NBA. But, it's a big story, and I really do want to give you guys, the news and everything. We just hope that he comes back stronger. Nothing but prayers for the James family. And yeah, without further ado, let's, try to move the topic along to the Charlotte Hornets, which this episode is going to be about. Now, the Charlotte Hornets, this episode in general probably won't be that huge, just based off the fact that the Charlotte Hornets really didn't do anything this offseason. They still have their own free agent, who I'm still surprised has not been signed, even to a qualifying offer. But the Charlotte Hornets finished last year 27-55, last in their division, the Southeast Division. They finished last year with the second worst record in the East, 14th, 10 games ahead of the Pistons, and the Pistons won 17 games. That's not really something you really are looking as a win in general. They had a really solid year the year before, and then they took a million steps back this year. Obviously, they have their problems, though, and that's something we're going to be talking about. LaMelo Ball, he hasn't been able to stay on the court, but they did sign him to a rookie scale extension. I want to say it was like 4 or 5 years, ton of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions. And I mean, it's a good deal for Charlotte because they're not really a free agency destination. They're not really, the place to be. So to lock up someone of LaMelo Ball's caliber for that much of time, I think that's only good, because worst case scenario, if things go south, it's a tradable contract. You can trade him. And I think that does work out for Charlotte and both LaMelo Ball. Terry Rozier is still over there in Charlotte. It's a guy that's been in rumors a ton. He came to Charlotte to kind of become that guy or that second option. And last year, he did average 21 points, granted on 41% field goal shooting. So it's kind of up there with him, but he is really good when he's open. He had a really bad year, though, in shooting the ball wise. The year prior, he shot 37% from 3, and he averaged 20 points per game. This year, he averaged 21 points per game, but his 3-point percentage went from 37 to 32. I want to say that's because the quality of shots he was getting, were probably not as good, even though he attempted the same amount of 3-pointers. He attempted 8 the year before, and then he attempted 8 this year. I want to say just because, when you have a guy like LaMelo, he makes the game so much more easier for everyone around him. And I do think that once he comes back into the fold of things, and, we're going to get into other names that are going to make the game a lot easier for Terry, you could be looking at another 20-point per game season for him. He's looking to go on 4 in a row now, unless you count 18. But ever since he's been in Charlotte, he's been an 18-plus point per game scorer. I do think that is on, the comeback. I think that could be something that we could look at. Brandon Miller, their second overall pick, he had a really, really bad, summer league. They signed him to his rookie scale contract. That was one of, their biggest moves this offseason. I mean, I don't really know what to say about Brandon Miller, only because, he hasn't played an NBA game yet. And NBA games are extremely different than, summer league games. The shots that other players are taking, they're not going to be taking in summer league, just because, everyone in summer league is trying to get theirs. They're trying to get their own. And I do think that Brandon Miller can really be that second scoring option, or maybe even that first scoring option, that Brandon Ingram-esque player for Charlotte, just a guy that you can give the ball to, can give you 20 to 25 a night. Obviously, maybe his first year, I do suspect a lot of field goal struggles. I do think he will shoot below league average. I think his true shooting percentage will be really, really bad. Those of you who don't know, true shooting percentage is your 2-pointers, 3-pointers, free throws, basically any shot you shoot in the game, all into one percentage. And I do think his will be really below league average. If I can just look up the true shooting percentage for guys that play his position, the shooting guard, small forward, the true shooting percentage was around 57 to 56%. Now that's something that do I think Miller will probably hit realistically shooting wise. I think he's shooting around 40% from the field, low 30s in three, maybe 70 to 80 on free throw. That's all going to average out to maybe high 40s, but even then, that is still way below league average. I do think Brandon Miller will struggle a bit, but I mean, it's still very early in his career. Maybe next year, his sophomore year, he takes a leap in efficiency, or maybe towards the end of his rookie year. We see that a lot where they struggle a lot their first half, and then that second, all-star break gives them a second wind, and they become more of an efficient player. Next is PJ Washington. Now, PJ Washington is still a free agent. I don't know how he's still a free agent. He's coming off a career year over there in Charlotte. He just finished averaging 16 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists, shooting 44% from the field, which for a big that shoots a lot of three-pointers, that's really, really good. Let me bring up his three-point percentage. He shot 35% from three this year. He has actually been a career 36% three-point shooter. So he's a really, really good shooter. He made 2 a game last year, which is his career high. He's just had career highs all across the board, and I'm just really surprised that Charlotte brings back a guy like, Miles Bridges and etc., but they don't bring back a guy like PJ Washington. Now, could the number of PJ and Charlotte be completely different? I think Charlotte is banking on the hope of him just signing his qualifying offer, which should be no more than $5 million. And I think PJ is holding out for someone to offer him a contract, but the money is drying up everywhere. Veteran minimums are almost the only thing. The only place where he can probably get a little more than $5 million is Chicago. Do I think he's a good fit in Chicago? I think he's a great fit in Chicago. He's the stretch four that they need. He can play defense. He shoots the three-point ball well. I would not be surprised if he ends up signing an offer sheet with Chicago. Do I think Charlotte matches it? Most likely. I think that's the most likely scenario here. So that's why I'm including him in this episode, just because I do think the most likely scenario is him going back to Charlotte. I really like him next to Brandon Miller, Terry, and LaMelo. Hypothetically, you get a guy that gets 16 points per game, a couple rebounds, and he shoots a three-ball well. That's all you can really ask for your big. That's starting next to your 5. I really do like that for them. Next is Mark Williams, who had a tremendous rookie year. I was actually really surprised that they didn't really play him as much, but they did just have Mason Plumlee, and then once they traded him, it was a lot more smooth sailing for him. But in his rookie year, he averaged 9.7 rebounds. That's really, really good for a rookie. His field goal percentage, 63%. Free throw percentage, you worry about 69%, but he averaged a block a game, only 2 fouls, which he was playing around 20 minutes a game. So I think that's really, really good for a rookie center. What do I look for him this upcoming season? I'm hoping somewhere around 10 points. So kind of same he's been doing now. So like 10 points with 10 rebounds, maybe up the blocks to maybe 1.5 blocks a game. But I think, we're really seeing the ceiling of Mark Williams, and this is definitely his best case scenario, becoming a starting center. Reminds me a lot of an Ivica Zubac in the sense of just block shots, rebound, and do the dirty work. And I think Charlotte desperately needs that, just because the people I've been naming before, LaMelo, Terry, Brandon, PJ, they're not the best defenders. Mark Williams can definitely be the anchor type of defender for this team. And I can definitely see him, growing into that mold and becoming a really nice spark plug for them. Their bench is just something that has been really, really lacking, and I think they didn't address it. Their only signing in free agency was Miles Bridges to the qualifying offer. Now, Miles Bridges has a ton of controversy behind him. He's going to be suspended for the first couple games of the season. Now, I want to say 15 games of the season, and we're not going to get into the controversy. We're just going to be talking about strictly basketball. And basketball-wise, he fits. He averaged 20 points per game the last season he played. He's a good shooter. He's a volume scorer. I do think that, with the addition of Brandon Miller, and we don't know if PJ is coming back or not, minutes are going to be hard to find, just because you have 3 guys around 6'7" to 6'9" that all essentially do the same thing, but they're all at different stages in their career. Miles Bridges is somewhat established. PJ is heading towards, becoming an established player. And then we have Brandon Miller, who is essentially a rookie, doesn't really know what his role is going to be. We have 3 guys in different stages of their career. And then, just to add more problems, they have Gordon Hayward's huge contract. Gordon Hayward was semi-healthy last offseason. last season, but even then in a semi-healthy season, he only averaged 14 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists. Now, that's actually pretty good comparing him to his other years. The year prior, he averaged 16, so it's kind of the same thing. He had better field goal percentage, but a way worse three-pointer shot, 32% from three. But 50 games, that's the most games he's played since Boston back in 2020. So that's pretty good for Gordon Hayward. You just hope he stays healthy, like any NBA player. You just want them to stay healthy. And I do think, you have 4 guys in your wing rotation, and it's a wings league, so I'm not going to be mad about it. But you have 4 guys that kind of do the same thing. They all are kind of, the same height. They all don't really play any sort of defense, really. So you really got to take into consideration. I do think they can be a team that consolidates and, trade someone at the trade deadline, whether that's PJ, because they don't think they're going to be able to bring him back. Miles Bridges, because they don't think they're going to be able to bring him back. Gordon Hayward, because he's on the last year of his contract. He's making $30 million. So he's a real, get out of jail free card that some team can use that wants to get rid of some money. And Brandon Miller, he's just the only one that's probably going to stay. The ones that are really could be on the trading block, Gordon, Miles, PJ, just guys that we don't really know what their roles are on this team, on a rebuilding team right now. It's just scores. So we'll go about that the way we go about usually everything else. What I really actually did like is one of my favorite moves of the offseason for Charlotte was drafting Nick Smith Jr. with their late first round pick. Nick Smith Jr. is someone that I have slated to go, top 20 in the draft. He fell to, below 20, I want to say late 20s. And I mean, he's a really solid player. He's just someone that at one point was a top ranked player in college. He was picked 27th. That's something that, you don't hear that much. A guy that was previously ranked top 5 to fall all the way down to 27th, all because of just some minor injuries. He had a couple knee injuries in college, but he still came back, averaged 20 points per game. He's a really good three-point shooter. He's extremely crafty and twitchy. I think they can realistically find the next person that replaces Terry Rozier. Nick Smith Jr., ESPN has Terry Rozier slid in as the backup point guard, as well as the starting shooting guard. I don't think that's really possible unless they plan on playing Terry, 36, 38 minutes a night. I say throw Nick Smith Jr. in there. I think he can be a perfect backup point. He reminds me a lot of Bones Highland, just the quickness, the shiftiness, the ability to create for himself. He can be a really, really fun player to see. And even then, they still have Theo Maledon, who did play last season with them. He was as mediocre as it kind of gets when it comes to him. Only 6.7 points, 3 rebounds, 4 assists, though. So you kind of do like that. But last year, he played 44 games for Charlotte. He shot below 30% from three, barely 40% from the field. He shot 85% from the free throw line, though. So that's something you really do like. But, you just kind of hope that Nick Smith Jr. can kind of take over that role and really do become, the straight backup point guard for this team. And maybe eventually when Terry's gone and all these vets are gone and they really start trying to win, Nick Smith Jr. can definitely be the starting shooting guard for this roster. And, as I mentioned, this team has a bunch of project players. They're definitely going to be rebuilding. They have guys like JT Thor, Kai Jones, who I'm so very high on. He had a massive poster dunk when I went to Las Vegas on Victor Wembanyama. Nick Richards, who's someone who, kind of similar to Mark Williams. They both kind of do the same thing, just a little different. And they have Cody Martin, who was also injured a lot last year. He barely averaged 5 points per game on below 40% from shooting, which is really, really bad. Nothing like his brother, who had a tremendous playoffs. You hope that he can duplicate that over there in Charlotte. But, this team, 27 wins is what they got last year. I think they're in it for another year of that caliber. I think this team is missing a lot of cohesionness. They're missing a bench. They're missing, they're just missing an identity. I don't know what this team's identity is. They have a ton of three-point shooting. They don't have a lot of defense. And I do believe in order to win in this league, you need defense. And this team doesn't have defense. I think LaMelo is in talks to be an all-star this year. I think that's definitely up there. Brandon Miller, everything goes right, should be making a case for Rookie of the Year. Mark Williams should be one of the more improved players in the league because he'll have a full year of everything going on. I do think their ceiling, though, is 35 wins. And, 35 wins will put them at 35-14 47, which I don't think is good enough to reach the play-in. I don't even think that's good enough to be the 11th seed. I don't think it's good enough to be the 12th seed. I think they'll go up from 14th to 13th, but that's kind of about it. I don't think they're really in for another good season. I think they should get another really high draft pick. Next year's draft class is not good, but I do think with the year 2 leap of Brandon Miller, the year, I want to say 4 or 5 leap from LaMelo, you hope that that's enough to bring you into at least the play-in, so you see small growth from this organization. Because worst case scenario, they don't make the playoffs this year, they don't make it next year, and they don't show any type of improvement. That LaMelo Ball contract is looking very tradable. Brandon Miller is looking like someone that you're going to re-sign only to trade him at the end of the day. It's just pieces that you're like, okay, well, I mean, they work on paper, but it's not something that you're super excited for. And that's just, the harsh reality for the Charlotte Hornets. So like I said, 35 wins. I think that's their ceiling. Their floor, I think, is dead last in the NBA. I think that's a real thing that can happen for them. Assuming LaMelo doesn't have another healthy year, Brandon Miller, which I think will struggle tremendously at the start of the year. That's something. They're not going to have Miles Bridges for the first 15 games of the season. PJ Washington, they still haven't signed him. So I'm just accounting for him to be on the roster, but he might not even be on the roster. And Terry Rozier probably being the only one playing. I do think that is looking very scary over there in Charlotte, and not in a really good way. I do think that it can get really ugly really fast over there, and they can definitely be a team that, is a seller at the trade deadline. I think that's a real possibility. They have some pieces that people would want, and I do think that it could be really bad in Charlotte in the next coming years. They just got new ownership too, and ownership has a tendency to, want to try to win as fast as possible. But with this roster, with the lack of moves they made, I don't think that's really possible. I think they really are going to have to start a whole new rebuild with this new team. Anyway, guys, that has been my, in-depth analysis to the Charlotte Hornets upcoming season preview. Now, we want to talk about a little bit of the NBA and kind of everything that's going on in the NBA, but there's not really much going on. I did talk about Bronny James in the beginning of this episode. Hopefully everything goes well with him. One thing we could talk about is Jaylen Brown, signing his massive extension, 5 years. I want to say $304 million. That is insane amount of money. I think a guy who struggled in the playoffs with, at times looked that he wasn't really effective. That's an insane amount of money to give him. Now, when I did my Boston Celtics preview, I did expect them to re-sign him. And, kind of weird how the couple days after he ends up signing with them, but it's fine. I think it's a good move. You want to lock up that duo of Brown and Tatum for as long as you can until the wheels fall off, essentially. And I think that's what Boston did. They gave him the 5 years fully, no player option, no team option, just all that money guaranteed, which is a little scary because by the time he's 33, I think he's going to be making close to 70 million. And that is a lot of money. That is just, wow, that's an insane amount of money. And I think that is somewhere where down the line, if Tatum is not on the roster, you try to trade that contract. But we're talking like 5 years, 4 years from now, where we start having those conversations. Anyway, though, that's kind of it for NBA news. There's not really much going on. But thank you guys so much for listening to the Charlotte Hornets preview episode for the 2023-2024 NBA season. Once again, thank you guys so much. Remember to check out the Instagram, interact with the reels and posts as much as possible. The ad is going to be at @the_first_pick_pod, and then follow the Twitter as well, which is @TF First Pick Pod. If you can't find the Twitter, head over to the Instagram, which I set the app before. Click the link tree in the bio, and then you should be able to find the Twitter on there. If you guys are having any sort of trouble, sometimes on the Instagram, I post tweets from the Twitter. So, just give the Twitter a follow. And also, please make sure to follow us on YouTube. It's the First Pick Podcast, should be found in the description. We've been getting the views. We've been posting the reels. So please just hit us with a subscribe. It's really not that hard. If you guys could please do that for me, I'd really appreciate that. But yeah, remember, listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Give us a 5-star rating. Share it with a friend. And thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. Peace.